January 17th, 2022, Martin Luther King holiday. And it's a time to remember Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a freedom fighter, and he passed the Civil Rights Act with the help of Presidents John F. Kennedy and others helped get the Civil Rights Act passed so that blacks were able to have the right to work, to get equal pay, to move around more freely, and just to enjoy the rights that they are entitled to, supposedly, in the United States, but they've been deprived of since coming to the United States as slaves centuries ago. It's a time for looking back, and this particular holiday I was looking back and thinking maybe it's a time for people to sit back and analyze who are they hindering, who are they standing in the way of, who are they preventing from having a full life. Blacks back in the 60s were fighting for just to get a job. Many of the characterizations of blacks were that they weren't working and that they were poor and that they weren't educated. Well, these things were because in many locations, in most locations, and practically all over the United States, blacks were not accepted into big in educational institutions. They were not trained on the latest science and mathematics and social services and all of the other things that are required in order to advance in society. They weren't given the jobs, even if they had the education. People weren't hiring blacks in the most upward rising jobs. Most blacks ended up getting civil service jobs or teaching jobs, mainly teaching blacks. And so that black students were getting taught by black teachers who had their backgrounds limited by racism. And so the students were being deprived of a full viewpoint as to what was going on in the United States and the things they could do. Jobs were discriminating. They would do in-person interviews, and the minute they saw you were black, they would use code in order to put your application at the bottom or to give you an automatic rejection for a job. If you were hired, you weren't given the right pay. You were given a lower pay scale, so that a job that should have paid well and provided for your family often ended up being not much of an improvement for the job that you were doing, and that you still ended up behind the 8 ball and not having enough money to do the things that you wanted to do, and often required you to go out and have a second job or just remain poor but happy for the job title that you had. So it's a time this year to look and say, what am I doing that is hindering others, that's making their life more difficult, that making them less than? And how can I affect things so that they can live a full life and be all that they can be the best person they can be, up to whatever they desire to want to be. It was interesting, I saw in the Daily Mail today, they did an article on Hugh Hefner, and they talked about the depravity of his Playboy mansion. Hugh Hefner was a white male who got into the sex business. He had a big house, which they called the Playboy Club, and he created in this private property a grotto, which was a water, like a very exotic swimming pool where they had a cave. You could go in there and people would go in there and do all kinds of sexual things. And they had the regular swimming area where people could still do sexual things, but it was more in the open. And they would invite people who were very important, who were wealthy, or people they wanted to know to the grotto for parties. They had parties almost every day there, and so that brought in a lot of money. They could sell a lot of things there. They could pay for entry. People who really wanted to get to the grotto could pay to get there, and so forth. And the girls that they brought into the grotto were basically very beautiful, very, very young. They would be teens, 20s, and so forth. Mostly blonde, some brunettes, very slim, and then they had these little suits, like tights that would cover, revealingly the breasts, and then there would be a bodysuit, and it would cut off at the hips, and then they would have bunny ears, and they were called the Playmates. The Playmates were basically prostitutes. Now, when these girls came into the grotto, they didn't know they were going into prostitution. They thought, because of the publicity around the Playboy Club, it was seen as an elite thing, a thing you wanted to do because you were looking so great. And it was one of the times breast augmentation really became very popular because it fit into this Playboy bunny suit. The girls wanted their breasts to be high and really filling out the top, and they wanted to look very big-breasted. So that was a time when early breast surgery became very popular. Now, in those days, the breasts were not as advanced. The breast surgery was not as advanced, and the things that they inserted did cause problems. And later, it led to the saline implants that they use now for breast augmentation, which are very human-like as far as softness, but they don't harden up the way the old silicone breast implants used to. So the girls came often to the Playboy Club where they served dinner, and they tried to get jobs with Hugh Hefner. And he might have them at the Playboy Club and originally, or he might move them right to the house where they would come for these parties, and they would serve basically as sexual persons for any men that came. And the men that came could also bring a girl with them, and sometimes the men would bring underage girls there, and they would say that they were a little bit older, and everybody would sign in. So Hugh Hefner has a huge number of log books as to who came to the grotto, who they bought, and what dates and so forth that they were there. But I don't think that's ever been revealed. Well, on this particular Martin Luther King's birthday, they did this article about the depravity of what went on in the Playboy Club, including bestiality, nightly group sex with the girls, having sex with each other. Hugh Hefner became very old and unable to really perform. I mean, he was pretty much, almost a corpse in the end, just laying in the bed, and the girls would do things to him, but he basically had the girls having sex with each other, and he was watching. And then they would have, it was a training session, it was a grooming session. They made this all look normal to the new girls so that they would be more inclined to participate and then get used to it and then become part of this prostitution ring. Now, everybody was there. Doctors, your cardiologists, your surgeons, your pediatricians, your scientists, a lot of government officials at all levels. And since it was in LA, of course, it would go down to even mayors, U.S. figures such as senators, congressmen, presidents were probably there, and a lot of people from the sports industry, including coaches, players, other administrators, just a wide range of people. And this was basically a white operation. Very few blacks came there, but there were notable blacks because there were some blacks who were held in very high esteem in the sports world, and it really helped Hugh Hefner if he could get these people to come to the grotto. Now, one of the people who went regularly was Bill Cosby, and he would go publicly To the general public, he would say he was going there for jazz night, and that they had this jazz program that they did every year. But we all knew it was a farce and that he was going there for the prostitution. But this went on for many, many years. And when Hugh Hefner died, the company went to his daughter, and she basically said she was going to stop the nude magazine, which also went with the club, and she said she was going to turn it more into girls with clothes on, which of course would make it more of an ordinary magazine. So on this particular Martin Luther King holiday, the Daily Mail, which I consider a racist magazine by the articles that they put out and their viewpoint on the articles that they do, wrote an article about the depravity of the Playboy Club, and all the people they listed that were going to the Playboy Club were blacks. They didn't list any whites, but they did list Bill Cosby, a black comedian, O.J. Simpson, a black football player who later was tried for killing his wife, a white woman named Nicole, and they listed a couple of other blacks. And I thought that article was really one-sided. They made it sound to people who didn't know about the Playboy Club that this was some sort of club where blacks were going and having sex with these white women. Almost every woman at the Playboy Club was white that they had to have there as prostitutes. So we have to be careful and how we get our history down, how we put black history straight. And this was an attempt by the Daily Mail to skew black history and by their article make it seem like this was some majorly black endeavor, which it was not. It was definitely almost all white, run by whites, white prostitutes, white owner in a white area of town in this mansion owned by a white man and his family. So this is a warning that racism is still there. It's very, very evident. And even in 2022, the racism of 1960s is still here, and people are still trying to rewrite history and use it as a negative in black history when really this was a white history subject. The other thing the article talked about was the use of Quaaludes. Now, I missed the era of Quaaludes because I was working very heavily and didn't do much socializing, but it was an era when many people had access to Quaaludes, a drug which people use to gain control mentally and physically over women, and at the Playboy Club, it was called the leg spreader, so that they could give it to the girls in drinks and so forth. They wouldn't know they were getting this drug, and they would become knocked out, basically, and people could have sex with them, and the girls wouldn't even have memories as to who had sex with them and so forth. Now, that part of that might have been because some of the people that they were going to have sex with that night unknowingly or probably repulsive. They might have been very old. They might have been just repulsive looking. And because of the racism, some of the girls might not want to have had sex with a black or some other race or ethnic group that was there. So this was a way of also getting the girls open to having sex with almost anybody. So for decades, they used Quaaludes at the Playboy Club, and they had Quaaludes stashed everywhere so that people could get the Quaaludes out and give it to the girls and gain control of them. They also had cocaine everywhere, so that there was so much cocaine, they said it was all over the floor, and even the dog was licking it up. And it was another way of getting the girls not only hooked onto prostitution, but it was also getting them to be drug users so that they would now become dependent on cocaine, and they would be much more cooperative to doing illegal things in order to get the cocaine. The other thing, using quaaludes and cocaine on the people at the Playboy Club allowed the people in control, Hugh Hefner, his staff, or anybody who was in control of that property, to place cameras and microphones all around the property so that while people thought they were just socializing, or while people were not in control because they were all drugged up, they could talk freely and they could take pictures. They could take pictures of people doing sexually inappropriate things. They could have tape recordings of people saying all kinds of things, sexually inappropriate things, or making other revelations about their business, secrets about their jobs, because these were also a lot of high-level government people, and those were all white back in those days. And they might tell some top secrets, or they might make comments about the stock market, or they might talk about international affairs and all kinds of things. So all of this evidence could be used at any time in the future against the individual that made the comments or who they had the pictures of, and then they could use that as blackmail to get the people to cooperate in the future. So this is all very similar to that which we saw in the Ghislane Maxwell and the Epstein case, where these two people were gathering information for many decades on people who were at high levels in government, in TV, media, sports world, and they were carrying around presidents, they were carrying around billionaires, they were carrying around all kinds of people, and then they were also carrying minors. They were putting minors in an airplane and taking them to all kinds of locations in the United States, and they accumulated so much money they had bought islands outside of the United States. They called the airplane the Lolita Express because Lolita is a story about a young girl whose mother died, and a rapist gains control of her after she becomes an orphan, and he continually rapes her and pays her low sums of money, enough money where she thinks she's going to be able to buy her way out from this guy in the future, but he keeps stealing the money back or holding the money back from her, and she never is able to escape. So it's a story of a girl forced into prostitution, and that story was always glamorized when I was a kid. I didn't understand it. What in the world was this story of Lolita? And when I found out what it was, I was absolutely repulsed, because it really was a story of abuse. And the man who gained control of the child actually killed the mother because she was a single mother. He killed the mother, gained control of the child, and then used her as a sex slave, basically. And she had no ability to really go out on her own because she was so young and she had no money. And the man looked very normal. He looked very authoritative. People believed him. And he would tell people that she was his daughter or something like that, because they would room together. And people would say, well, why are you rooming with this young girl? And he would say, oh, that's my daughter. It's fine. And people, because he looked okay, would say okay. And they would allow them to room together. So this Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislane Maxwell were doing this on the Lolita Express. They were gaining control of these young people and guiding them towards prostitution, making it seem normal so that the girls would not question what was going on. They would see that other girls are doing this stuff because the other girls had also been brought quietly, secretly into this prostitution ring, and then they would have the trained girls have sex with the untrained girls, and they were always taking their clothes off and so forth. So all of this became normalized among these girls who were now being used as prostitutes. So and this is again another white business. All the girls that were prostitutes in the Ghislane, Maxwell, Jeffery Epstein prostitution scams were white. The girls were white. Normally he liked blondes, and he would get the girls from 14 on. And President Trump even talked about Jeffrey Epstein when he talked to a group of boys around 14 years old who were in the Boy Scouts. He had a big troop meeting, and at the time, President Trump was addressing the troops, and he said he had a friend. His life was very unusual, and he was talking about Jeffrey Epstein, but of course, no one knew of Jeffrey Epstein outside of the people in this group. So we didn't know what he was talking about, but he was referring to this childhood sex ring, and he was laughing to these 14-year-old boys, referring to 14-year-old girls who these old men are having sex with. And it's just bizarre. All of this comes together on this Martin Luther King holiday, and it reminds us we need to take care of each other. Look around. Who needs your help? How can you help? And what secrets need to be discussed so we can make the place better for all?